my top priority, and I used it to really educate folks on a day-to-day basis. Farmers who may not know what a working mom has to go through. Businessmen out of the boot heel who have their wives at home taking care of their kids and don't have to face this sort of thing. And so what I did was I just made it a mission that I'm going to get this done. And the first year that I brought the bill to the floor, I was so excited. I thought, this is a no-brainer. I've got a Republican co-sponsor. Everyone thinks it's a good idea. And I actually lost by one vote. I had to offer it as an amendment onto another bill because I was having trouble getting it out of committee, and I lost by one vote. And it was a very kind of emotional thing. I was frustrated. It was late in session. I really wanted it to happen, and was exhausted. And one of the senators stood up and he asked to inquire of me, and I yielded to him, and he said, the reason I didn't vote for your bill was because the state of Missouri should not be involved in child care. And I'm like, okay. He said, no, we should not be involved because women should be at home taking care of their kids while their husbands are out working. And I couldn't even respond to this guy. By the way, it was the John Wayne Brokeback Mountain guy, just so you know, to kind of bring it all together. And I'm like, seriously? I mean, this guy's really saying this? And I was so frustrated and dumbfounded that anyone would say that I couldn't even respond. And I just kind of sat there with a look on my face, and I probably mumbled something out, and then I just kind of sat down. Thankfully, Senator out of Kansas City, Senator John Wilson, I'd say probably at the time 80 years old, maybe a little bit older, didn't look a day over 60. Former school teacher, former principal, and just absolutely a tough woman, stood up and schooled that guy, thankfully, because I couldn't even talk. And so she asked to inquire of him and gave him a lecture like I've never heard. I was incredibly happy about that. What was interesting to me is that he was a Republican, but almost all of his Republican colleagues came up to me and said, we don't agree with that. That's ridiculous. What you're trying to do is not out of the realm of the possibility, and let's try to get this done next year. So I brought the bill back next year with even more Republican co-sponsors on it, and we're getting to get these guys to understand the kind of the plight of the working mom in the state of Missouri, and they're starting to understand it, and it's moving forward. And so we had a vote on the floor that year, and I was so excited because it was a tie, and I was like, woohoo! And they're like, no, Senator Justice, the tie does not go to the runner in the legislature. You lost again. And I was just like, kidding me. So yeah, so another year goes by, and I only have 8 years down there. Term limits, I get 2 4-year terms. So even if I get reelected, I get a second chance, second 4 years. But if I don't get reelected, my clock's ticking. I have no chance to get this done. So I don't pass it that year. So the third year, I'm so excited. I come back. I've got every chamber of commerce in the state of Missouri testifying on this thing. We're talking about it no longer as child care assistance. This is job creation. This is economic development. This is a workforce issue. I've got small business owners talking about the importance of doing this, and I'm really learning the lingo. I've got every man in that chamber, with the exception of the dude, I think you remember which one, on board with this thing. I've got all the women on board with this thing. I mean, we are trucking. We're ready to go. I get it out of the body. I got it passed. It was 33-1. I guess maybe the one was. And then I hit another wall. Because in the Missouri legislature, if your bill costs more than $100,000 to the state of Missouri, it has one more step before it goes to the House. And that is called GAFO, which is Governmental Accountability and Fiscal Oversight. And guess who the chairman of that committee was? The senator from South Central Missouri, who said he would never vote for this bill because a woman should be home taking care of her kids. So I was just distraught, and I tried every political maneuver possible. I called in every favor. I mean, all of these guys that I've been in the back room drinking scotch with, and I'm like, I'm cashing in my chips now. All those nights when I didn't have to do this stuff, you're on. And by the way, the whole time I'm building up all this credit with these guys, because what happens so many times in the legislature is these crazy ideas come over from the House. Our saying on the Senate side is that the House makes the news and the Senate makes the laws. I think some folks probably know that better than others because some of the things that they file over on the House side. And that's just our inner chamber fighting that we do. But these crazy things would come over from the House. For instance, there's a bill last year that the House wanted to return to the gold standard. This basically means that we as Missourians would opt out of our money system. We'd no longer use dollars. And I guess what would happen is as I go into McDonald's and I want a Big Mac, and I just take my earring off and say, here you go, there's some sterling silver for you. So that's the kind of stuff they're sending over, but they're all too chicken to stand up and vote no on it, because they don't want to vote no on it because they're concerned about a Tea Party primary. They're concerned that when they go back and run for their next race, that someone further to the right of them, more conservative, and by the way, it's the same with liberals, they're worried that someone further to the left from them is going to come and primary them. And so what happens is they come to me and they say, can you stop this bill? I'm like, what do you mean stop this bill? Can you filibuster it so we never have to vote on it? I'm like, well, all right, but I'm gonna come back and cash in this favor someday. And they're like, we know, but just please don't make us vote on this. I'm like, all right, straight up, I'll do that. And so I had spent 3 years doing those kinds of things for these guys. Sitting in the back room, becoming one of the guys, doing all of these things, doing all of these favors, and I'm ready to cash in the chips, but of course I run into this committee problem and there's nothing I can do about it. There's absolutely nothing I can do about it. So we all hit the drawing board over that year, and we came back, and just to kind of finish up the story, what I ended up doing that last year was I created a bill that had a fiscal note that was nebulous enough that it was under $100,000 and would not have to go through that Senator's Committee anymore. It would just go straight over to the House. What we did was we made it so that you wouldn't, that cliff I was telling you about between the $7.12 an hour and the $7.13 an hour, you wouldn't just have a cliff and then drop off, that there'd be a phase out, and we were able to kind of move money around and draw down federal dollars and all that stuff that everyone loves about politicians, with all of the back room and the figuring and all that kind of stuff. But we got it to where it wouldn't have a problem with his committee, and then I got it out. Actually, I got it out of the Senate twice that year. Once 33-1, once 34-0. I don't think he understood what he was voting on at that moment. But I ended up actually passing the bill twice that year. And I'm firmly confident it was because of the fact that by the time we got it done, we had everybody in that room talking that language. We weren't calling it child care assistance anymore, we were calling it job vouchers. In shorthand in Jefferson City, it's kind of a silly partisan thing, but Republicans love the word voucher, and everybody loves the word jobs. All politicians love the word jobs, so we've called it job voucher. It sounds cooler and less like some sort of social service program. When we had our hearings, I was running these bills through economic development committees instead of children and families committees. We no longer had the single moms coming in talking about their sad stories. We only had Fortune 500 companies coming through and saying, we got to have this so we can have a better workforce. Those were the sorts of maneuvers that we did, and that and all of the political capital that I built up over the 4 years were how we finally got that done. And so I think that kind of leads me to where I am right now. Last year, I guess, yeah, it's last year now, we went through a redistricting process in the state of Missouri, and every 10 years there's a census, and then we have to shift the districts around, and it was quite controversial because what happens is you get 5 Republicans and 5 Democrats, and they have to come up with a map. And that map has to, they have to have a consensus. At least 7 of those people have to agree with the map. And if they don't agree with the map, then it goes to the courts. Well, shocking, 5 Republicans and 5 Democrats couldn't come to an agreement to get a map, and so it went to the courts. So the courts drew a map, and the map changed the boundaries of my district pretty dramatically. But after the map had been out there for a few days, the court pulled it back and said, whoops, that one was unconstitutional. We need a second try. And so they drafted another map, and they sent that one out. And it changed it too, a little bit, but not too dramatically. So then there was a lawsuit, and someone who didn't like the map, and it wasn't me, someone who didn't like the map sued and said, that was unconstitutional, court, what you did. Number one, the first one you drew was not valid, and that was true. And number two, you don't get a do-over. Like you tried, and so you need to throw this map out. And the Supreme Court agreed. And so the Supreme Court, which was the court higher than the court that had drawn the map, said, nope, sorry, go back to the drawing board. 5 new Republicans, 5 new Democrats. They've got to come up with a consensus. And the reason they're fighting is because the Republicans want to draw a map that's easier for Republicans to win, and Democrats want to draw a map that's easier for Democrats to win. It's just how it is. It was interesting because they were on their way to a deadlock again, and it was on its way to the courts when someone came up with this harebrained scheme where they would move my district, the 10th district, from Kansas City, Missouri. If anyone's ever been to Kansas City, I represent kind of all of the area that you think of as Kansas City. Downtown, Plaza, Crown Center, Brookside, Westport. And that's my district. Very urban area. They were going to take my district, the 10th district, and they were going to move it from Kansas City all the way across the state, and it's going to start in Callaway County. I don't know if anyone knows where Callaway is. That's going to be Callaway, Audrain, Monroe, Montgomery, Warren, and Lincoln counties. So no longer having any connection whatsoever to Kansas City. I was going to be moved all the way across the state. Well, I got wind of this about, I guess it was the night before it happened, when some of the folks involved came to me and they said, we think the only way we're going to get consensus is if we do this. What do you think? And I'm like, you got to tell me what's in this for me, because this sounds absolutely insane. And they said, okay, first of all, number one, you don't have to move. And I'm like, well, good, because I'm not going to. Number two, you get to serve out your last 2 years in the legislature. I said, that's fine, absolutely, that's good. I mean, you're not going to kick me out the door. I was at that point, I was pretty much the shoe-in to be the minority leader. It's an elected position among your own caucus, and it looked at that point like my colleagues were going to elect me, and they later did elect me as minority leader. And I was interested in having more Democrats, so that's kind of where the angle I was coming from. And they said, next year you're automatically going to get a new Democrat. I said, well, how's that? And they said, your replacement, the person who represents Kansas City, is going to be elected this summer. And so someone is going to be serving alongside you who is actually your senator, which was going to be kind of a weird deal because usually you are your own senator, and now I'm actually represented by a guy who won an election last summer. And so I'm in his office all the time complaining about his constituent services, and I never does it. Anyway, it's got to be completely annoying to have the person whose place you're taking actually serving alongside you. But we actually had a good relationship. So that meant we were going to go from 8 to 9 Democrats, which I liked. Wow. Then the last piece was this. We were going to basically, and this was the consensus piece, and this is how it got around it, we were going to shake some of the Tea Party influence off of the map. Missouri is an incredibly moderate state. We are not an extreme state. We're not an extreme left-wing state. We're not an extreme right-wing state. The majority of folks in the state are in the middle, and they're tired of extremism. And so what this map was going to do was make it so that more of these districts were more moderate, so that you would have more elections that were won in the general election where you've got a fair fight between a Republican and a Democrat, and less decided in primaries, where you get an extraordinarily liberal Democrat or an extraordinarily conservative Republican. The reason that the Democrats and Republicans agreed on that is they wanted to shake some of that Tea Party influence that had been sort of detrimental in Jefferson City. They wanted to shake that from it. And so these 10 people who, frankly, they were none of them elected politicians. They were just 10 lay people appointed by the governor, got together and came up with this was the way they were going to do it. Now, every 10 years, some senator gets moved a little bit like that in order for there to be a consensus. No one's ever been moved to the extent that like one guy, went kind of down the west side of the state. One guy went down the east side of the state. I got moved across the state. And so I agreed to it. I mean, I don't know that it would have made any difference if I would have said no. I mean, it was nice of them to come tell me, but we don't have any control over it in the legislature, so they would have done it anyway. It was 10-0. All 10 people agreed with it. And so anyway, I think that the reason I wanted to bring all of that up is because now I'm on the last phase of my career, which is I'm in my last 2 years of the legislature. I am the minority leader this year, which has been an incredibly fascinating position, and now I'm getting to know my new constituents. And it's a heavily Republican district. They are freaked out right now. They have no idea what to expect. They've heard things. I had the director of agriculture meeting with a group of farmers one day, and they were up in arms because they were yelling at him, and they were like, "We just heard that our new senator is a vegetarian." And he's like, "Boys, she is a vegetarian, but she's good on her ag issues, so don't worry about it." And then he turns to me and he goes, and then I ran out of the room before they could ask me any more questions. That's probably good. That was probably good. So, I mean, the reality is that it has been interesting to be a minority on several different levels. But because I have been there and because I have had a voice at the table, I think I have helped in addition to every other constituent who goes down and tells their personal story. I have helped change the hearts and minds of some of these folks, and so I am happy not only to have represented the people of Kansas City, but I'm happy to represent rural